Hey everybody, this is Dr. Kevin McGovern, and today is another Velocity RX podcast. And this is to pay the bills brought to you by velocityrx.org. We have a new newsletter coming out, so please click on that link and check it out. And today I have a incredibly special guest. He and I have been pretty close to step for step on the cesspool known as Twitter for a long time now. And both of us have a lot in common. One is that we take a lot of heat from the cult that is these non-qualified, non-medically driven people who, of course, are, let's be honest, they're better marketers than Chris and I, right? They just are. You'll get I'm on fans or whatever, the links of these, posts, and I'll get a post, and as soon as I click it, it already has 3,000 likes, which is impossible. Okay. So we know with AI and bots, okay, but like if I'm on your feed and you put up a post, there's no way that 3,000 people got to it before I did and liked it. It's just impossible. All right. So, but without further ado, I have my very special guest today is Chris O'Leary, aka the Pain Guy. And Chris, thank you very much for coming on, and I appreciate your time.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been pretty ghosted pretty hard, especially since I've got the Jeff Passan book right here
Yes,
next to me.
yes.
So he went after me for 6 pages in that book, just lied his ass off. Uh, I actually to the point where I actually consulted a lawyer to see if I could sue him about it, and they didn't want to take it on because that was when he was with Yahoo before ESPN. If Passett had been with ESPN, that might have been a bigger deal. But yeah, it's I've been ghosted pretty hard since 2016. It's funny. I've been in the freaking New Yorker, in New York Magazine, but this was an ESPN magazine, but this was
Um,
all 10 years ago or so.
sure.
Uh, in and I think you've talked about this. ESPN, the magazine, their Tommy John surgery inverted W article, Lindsay Berra. I talked to her for days about that, and she never even mentioned my name. She used all my illustrations, but it's
So
very frustrating.
funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
Lindsay Berra spent not one, not two, not three, but 4 days at my facility, okay? Because she was dating one of my employees at the time, who will remain nameless. We went over all my pitching stuff, my game exam, everything. And um, her boyfriend wanted some huge raise, right? Which, you know, in this business, you got to kind of eat what you kill. I can't guarantee stuff.
Right.
He was good, right? He's got his own place now. Good for him. And I'm like, I can't meet that. And next thing you know, the article came out. I think uh, Paul Reddick was
Yeah.
credited with a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that I had said, and not one mention
Yep.
um, was of any of. I mean, literally, there were verbatim stuff that I had said was in that article, and I wish I had the money to sue her and ESPN. But the good thing is, as far as I know, she's out of journalism, which she should
Right.
be, and I never want to hear the name again.
And I feel bad. The Bears are a big deal in St. Louis, but
Yeah.
she's playing the game, and unfortunately, she is playing the game, and the game is too often played, and people like you and me who know some stuff and who are trying to do the right thing are too often shuttled aside.
So, Chris, the incident of you'd have to be deaf, dumb, blind, and a pinball wizard to not see that the incident of
Right.
Tommy John surgery, I think between and it's funny, speaking of great marketers, between the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees, who both have very good marketers at the top of their food chain, had, I think, combined 12 Tommy John surgeries this season already.
Yeah, I know the White Sox are a disaster, so
So, and you've talked about some of the history, and you're definitely more versed on the history of why. And I think
right.
why is a gentleman who is from my home state of Connecticut. So
Yeah.
give me kind of the background, because Roger Clemens threw hard, J.R. Richard threw hard, Kurt Schilling threw hard. You know, uh, I was just watching the World Series with the Braves, their closer Wallers. I mean, he was throwing 99, 100 miles an hour.
Right.
So for people to say, and I think at that point they were not measuring it back then in like 96 and
Right.
97, they were not measuring it out of the hand. That was behind home plate. So he was
Right.
probably, Wallers could have been 102. We have no idea.
Right.
So what has been the biggest shift, or why are we in this situation in your opinion?
Okay, so I start 20 years ago with my oldest son who was a pitcher. And I didn't know anything and I knew I didn't know anything. But he was showing some promise. He had a natural sinker, a natural two-seamer, and he was the kind of kid who could actually get out of an inning in 4 or 5 pitches.
Which is should be the
Right.
goal.
Right. Yeah, it's just, ground ball to shortstop, strike, ground ball to second base, strikeout.
Yep,
You know, just
that's it.
just nothing. So that got me thinking, okay, if he's got some promise, how do I protect him? Because when I was a kid, I screwed up my shoulder. I think trying to throw sidearm, submarine, Quisenberry, Kent Colby, that kind of stuff. Uh, and I
Blast
didn't
from the
want,
past.
yeah, I didn't want what happened to me to happen to them. I don't, I think I ended up, well, I actually remember the moment where probably I pulled my shoulder joint out of its socket throwing too hard wrong, throwing submarine in the outfield, that kind of thing. I was way down, not over the top. And in order to be able to play catch with my boys, I've had to completely remodel my throwing motion, which is to throw more over the top. But so 20 years ago, like exactly 20 years ago, I started looking around. I saw Tom House, I saw Dr. Mike Marshall, and I knew about Paul Nyman, the Connecticut guy, the engineer guy. Uh, I didn't really like House because I could see inconsistencies between what he was preaching and what his video and what his pictures were showing, and it didn't really. I saw the inconsistencies. Uh, I saw the same thing with Nyman, and Nyman was actually worse, where Nyman was claiming that Billy Wagner and Nolan Ryan moved exactly the same, and the more I looked into it, the more I found that to be really kind of an absurd idea. I ended up going with Dr. Mike Marshall to start because he was interested in injury prevention, was ostensibly interested in throwing hard, was trying to strike this balance. Marshall didn't do a good job of striking the balance in the end, but he at
And his
least was,
mechanics are a little
yeah, right,
crazy.
right.
I mean,
And there's half of his stuff is gold and half of it is
sure.
crap. Uh, but I did like the conversation that he was having, the things that he was talking about. I did end up breaking with Marshall because he just got kind of crazier and crazier and harder and harder to defend. Uh, but where I really got I ended up starting out as a Marshall guy, as I just wanted to be a Dr. Mike Marshall guy. I ended up breaking with him, going out on my own, and ended up taking a look at Nyman, trying to understand what Nyman was saying, why Nyman was saying that, why it was working, why it wasn't working, kind of the cost benefit. Nyman was selling a free lunch with the inverted W at the time, and then House picked up the inverted W, took that to Mark Pryor in particular. And 20 years ago is when Mark Pryor was looking like the next Nolan Ryan. And then he would kind of fall apart. And I thought that was a good decision to look at Mark Pryor as he fell apart as he aged. Because
Now,
that was with the Cubs, and I'm with the Cardinals, so I'm seeing them and I'm
sure.
thinking about them, and oh my God, the Cubs don't have one Bob Gibson; they've got two Bob Gibsons and Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood. Are the
Right.
Cardinals ever going to win another game? You know,
Now, when you were looking at that and this inverted W, which I challenge people who are watching this to just put your arms in this position for the next 30 seconds. Okay. The UFC calls this a Kimura. Okay. This is a submission position of abduction and internal rotation. Did anyone there say, like, yeah, any of these, Dr. Tom House, which is not a medical doctor,
he's a
has nothing,
psychologist,
psychologist, yep, MBA in business, has nothing to do with
right?
medicine. No, so did anyone like say, yeah, horizontal abduction, internal rotation of the shoulder is not the best starting point? Was there anything that anywhere published because as far as what I'm seeing, because I got to the game late, but then all of this stuff, someone said I've read the Kerry Wood or not Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor has got perfect mechanics, and I took one look at this, and I'm like, perfectly how? Like it seems like baseball.
Well, and
There's a
at the
negative
same
result. You
at
get
the
that
same
result, it's
time
great.
a good friend of mine and my son, he was a sheet metal worker and he was having his rotator cuff worked on, and he was telling me that sheet metal workers and plumbers and pipe fitters, because they're constantly working with their elbows above their heads, are constantly having rotator cuff problems.
Because literally that's a direct
Right.
impingement. When you go straight abduction, for many reasons, I've done show like the shoulder blade doesn't turn. It's literally bone on tendon, right? The body isn't. We're meant to be inside of a phone booth,
Right. Right.
not out here. So
Right.
continue
So
on. I just wanted
right.
to,
So
yeah.
I had House talking about all this stuff and getting all this traction. I knew that Nyman was behind the scenes. Basically, House just stole all of Nyman's stuff and just kind of went crazy with it. Uh, and I couldn't deny the results. Billy Wagner was throwing hard, although by the time Billy Wagner, I think when he got out, he was lights out in Houston, but then he went to like Philadelphia and he went to the Mets and everything. So if you ask about Billy Wagner, you have to determine whether you're talking to a Astros fan or a Phillies, or I
Right.
guess he completely blew up with the Phillies. He did okay with the Mets, but wasn't the same pitcher that with the
No,
Astros. So
his shoulder was hurt. There's no
right,
doubt about it. Or
right,
elbow, right? It was wear and tear.
and that was the biggest problem that I had with Nyman is Nyman. See, and so I've got an MBA and was taught the basic principle of economics is that there's no free lunch, which is what I'm constantly tweeting. And all I'm doing is I'm just applying my microeconomics
I've seen that a
to
hundred times. Yep.
baseball. Right. Uh, and what became obvious to me was that House and Nyman were selling a free lunch. Uh, or even worse, they were selling a trick and a shortcut without disclosing the downside of that. And to a degree, all I want is informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
If people can take these risks, take these chances, and do so in an environment of informed consent, I don't necessarily have a problem with that.
Right. You're
Uh,
signing off on it.
Right.
Right.
If they're adults, adults
Yep.
can make stupid choices, but
Yep.
they should be told that these are stupid choices they're making. And that brings in Kyle Boddy of Driveline, who I was
And when did
talking
they come on? When did they come on the scene? Like again, like I said, I was kind of in my own
2006,
2006.
2006, 2007, 2008. And the kind of the scary, well, there are a couple things. So I helped Kyle Boddy get healthy in
So you knew him
2006.
before Driveline.
Yep. I knew him.
Oh,
And that was one of the reasons why he started Driveline, because I taught him the Marshall stuff. I said, you should fix yourself using this Dr. Mike
now how
Marshall
did you
stuff,
two
Doc.
come? How did you two come together?
Just through Baseball Fever website. I was
Okay.
on these websites trying to get information, then eventually kind of giving out information.
Was he a pitcher or what was he?
Yeah,
Was
yeah. He
he
pitched
was?
he pitched in high school and he was trying to get healthy, and
Gotcha.
he was a big inverted W guy. And I'm like, you got to stop the inverted W. You've got to pay more
Which is a
attention.
teach, by the way, because your body, no little kid ever picks up a ball and gets in
Yeah.
this position. They throw it like a pie.
Right, right, right. Uh, so what's frustrating is Body actually started out Driveline trying to sell Doc as Body was trying to be Dr. Mike Marshall with better marketing and less antagonistic. The problem was is that that didn't sell, and Body ended up going the Nyman route, and ultimately, and to this day, Body sells the ideas that got his own shoulder without informed consent, without disclosing that. Now, I've said
So
that
meaning he's selling
he's selling
the
the inverted
mechanisms
W.
that hurt himself.
Right,
Yes.
right. He knows the inverted
And
W.
I've seen your post on that a
Right.
bunch of
He
times.
knows the inverted W hurt himself. He fixed himself by getting rid of his inverted W, and now he sells it as the spiral staircase. That's
Why?
complete. It's completely unethical because it works. He sells it because it works and it allows him to
For
promise and deliver
this
velocity.
period of time as opposed to
Right,
career, right? I mean, like, Steven Strasburg won't be
right,
can't feed himself because his arm is numb,
right. And but
thoracic
and
outlet.
again, well, and the analogy I've used with there are a bunch of guys in DC that I've been on their radio show like 20 times, and they actually get this stuff. They're in DC because of Strasbourg, and that's how we've connected. And they help me kind of clarify my ideas. This doing this with the high elbows hurts, but it isn't necessarily bad, although it's probably bad to a degree. But the bigger problem with the high elbows thing is that then puts you in a flat arm position, and it's the flat arm thing that really kind of ultimately is the problem. If you look at Nolan Ryan, if you look at Tom Seaver, you look at Bob Gibson, you look at Justin Verlander early on, when their shoulders start to turn, their pitching arm is up, vertical, 90 degrees of external rotation or so, 75 to 90 degrees of external
Hmm.
rotation. What's happened over the years, well, and one of the things I noticed was that starting pitchers, the Ryans, the Seavers, the Gibsons, the Verlanders, their arm was up when their shoulders started to rotate, which is usually at foot plant. The thing I noticed is that guys who got hurt more, the Chris Carpenters, the Adam Wainwrights, the Anthony Reyeses, their arms were flatter. And basically over the past 15 years, arms have gotten progressively flatter to the point where now modern pitchers, instead of starting with their pitching arms up, instead have their pitching arms basically flat. And
Correct.
that's what I call flat arm syndrome. That's a timing problem.
And
Now,
I say that say the thing. It's late. They're late, right?
right,
Their arm is
right,
late. Yep. Same
right.
thing.
And the worst part is that that used to be recognized as a flaw, and now it's what Driveline sells.
So they're literally selling that arm position. That is
No,
not
yeah,
a
you can
that's
see
not a
it.
lie.
If
They, I
if
mean,
you Google driveline spiral staircase, you'll come across a website describing a pattern that I would call the inverted W or the inverted L or the inverted V.
because I had a gentleman on a couple weeks ago who started as a parent taking his little league team to Driveline, then his own kid was injured, and then he's become completely he was, unaware. That's the whole
Right,
he was
right.
just uninformed. He's like, "Oh, well this," and then he's like, "Wait a minute."
Because
And
nobody talks about this stuff
no
because it's
one talks
completely
about
undiscussable.
right. And they don't obviously I thought with Shane Bieber going down, something would have changed, but it didn't. It continues. I mean, here's a two-time Cy Young Award winner, goes there for a winter and doesn't pitch again.
I don't know what to say. It's really insane, and it is a lot of the problem is the embargo. Uh, the fact that nobody will talk about this stuff. In worst case, Jeff Passan wrote this book that is the most enabling thing in the world that really just kind of the only thing I could think of is that Passan he's got a kid who plays, or at least played. This is as of 16, so approaching 10 years ago. He was playing up. The only way that kid could be competitive was to teach him the bad stuff. So basically, Jeff Passan's the arm is one big exercise
What not to do.
in what not to do in reality distortion. It's Passan defending the decisions he made with his own kid's arm. And I had a conversation in August 2013. I had a conversation with Pass, and we were at a baseball game, a Cardinals game. I was there filming. He happened to be passing through. This is the day that it was announced that Matt Harvey was going to need Tommy John surgery. I explained this all to Pass and to his face, and I would needless to say I was a little shocked when he started sending me galleys of his book. And he's like, "Here's what I'm going to say," and I'm like, "Jeff,
It's
not
wrong.
only is it a lie, you're going to hurt people."
So we have this epidemic, but now we see, I know Body was at Cincinnati. He, whatever damage he did there, they fired him, kicked him out, threw him out. Now he's at the Red Sox as
Right.
some special advisor, which is fine because I'm a Yankee fan. But
Oh,
we
okay.
have,
All right. Because
but
I was going to say,
yeah,
how's that
yeah, we
working
have,
out?
but we have disciples, right? We've got now. I mean, I'm not lying. We've got Eric Cressey at the top of the food chain for the New York Yankees, highest injury rate in all of baseball. The Tommy John academics. We've
Well,
got
and Matt Blake with the Yankees, and I know Blake. I tried to educate Blake because
so
Blake was
Blake, my one of my buddies, because Blake came out of what, Holy Cross. So one of my buddies had a place in Natick, Massachusetts, was working there, and they're like, look, you got to teach this guy how to give lessons, and that was like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Now he's the pitching coach of the franchise that's worth the most money in history, and one of my buddies had to teach him how to. What does he know about pitching? other than he
Right.
pitched.
Right.
And so the injury rate is, I mean, what I don't understand is how are insurance companies still insuring these contracts? And why is it you and I and a few others, not many, that are saying enough, and then we're shunned? Like,
Right.
oh no, tread and drive line. This is the way to, I mean, I know I had Jim Rooney on my podcast. Like he knows he's in that area where tread is. They tried to hire high school kids to stand in the box, and they quit after a day because they were tired of getting beamed with balls.
Right.
Like I don't get it. And these the colleges in my area. One year I had a Division III school. Like five of their pitchers are out hurt with using these weighted balls and these drive line techniques, and no one is either they're not drawing the obvious inclusion or they don't care. I don't know what it is.
Well, in Tread, I saw Ben Brewster of Tread put up a video yesterday where he was kind of talking around some of this stuff, but he did it in such a way that it was obvious that he didn't care. He was just giving it lip surface. He was talking about external rotation and how he likes, the desired angle is anywhere between 30 degrees and 90 degrees. Well, 30 degrees to 90 degrees is a gigantic spread. Like I said,
Ask your labrum.
right, exactly.
Gigantic.
Right. Like I said, my window is 75 to 90 degrees. I'd go no lower than 60 degrees or so.
Anything past 100, which is anything 110 degrees of external rotation, every degree you are doing damage to your shoulder, irreparable damage for your shoulder to get, because 90 degrees is normal. Obviously, pitchers have more, but they have more because they have stretched out soft tissue structures.
Right. Well, and let me make a point that people may not get. We're talking about external rotation, which is kind of the up of the arm. I'm not talking about elbow flexion.
No,
I don't really care about elbow flexion. I'm not convinced that elbow flexion makes a difference whether I'm long arming or I'm short arming. So I'm short arming like a catcher, long arming like Justin Verlander were when he first came up. And I have no problem with, and in my experience, most kids when they first throw will tend to be long armers, where the elbow is outside of 90 degrees. My basic rule of thumb is anything but 90 degrees. I don't want 90 degrees. Yes, it's a round number, but just because it's a round number, I can make anatomical arguments about how that focuses the stress on the UCL. I either want to see short arming like a catcher or long arming like Justin Verlander. Uh, and the worst part is seeing kids doing, naturally doing the right thing and then being coached out of it. I screwed myself up by trying to copy Tekulve and Quisenberry because I could do kind of crazy things with the ball. But well, and let me explain one context thing for people. I wasn't taught anything in terms of how to throw. I remember Mr. It's the first day of baseball practice. Mr. Blackburn has us pair up and we just throw. Well, how do we throw? We throw. You throw by throwing. How do you throw? Well, you
throw.
throw. You know.
Right?
So what I would be doing is kind of a 90-degree long arm kind of arm action, very kind of standard what you're going to see in 80% of kids just kind of naturally, as you said, generally speaking, they have to be coached into the high elbow stuff. Uh, Now that's not universally the case. I did have a nephew who ended up doing elbow lifting despite my every best effort. I think he picked it up from his friends, basically. I think his friend said, "Well, you'll throw harder if you lift with your elbows, you'll throw harder." And being a kid, he did that. But I wasn't taught anything. And so why did I notice this stuff? Because I wasn't taught anything in terms of how to throw. So I really didn't teach my kids anything. The only thing I taught them was to get sideways, which, engages the core basically. And now suddenly you're throwing with your core, not just your arm. And that's the biggest mistake that, you're talking about pushing the ball or throwing like a girl. That's the biggest mistake that girl parents make is they don't get their girls sideways because girls naturally want to face you because in girl world that's how you interact with someone, whereas in boy world it's a little different and being sideways to someone is no big deal. but it turns out that in
Good
order to
point.
teach someone in order to teach someone to throw, you have to get sideways to each other because then you're throwing with your core and with your hips, not just your arm. But that's a very easy thing to fix in girls is you just have to recognize, okay, yes, they're going to want to face each other, but that's not how you teach them to throw. There's nothing inherent about being a girl to throwing like a girl. It's just it's a it's a wiring, it's a brain chemistry wiring thing. Well, and the
Sure.
analogy that I've used with some people is in girl world, if I'm face to face with you and I'm looking exactly at you, that means you have my complete attention, that there's nothing more important to me in girl world. In boy world, my looking straight into your eyes for too long starts to send the message that I want to kick your ass.
We want to fight. Yeah, it's fight or
Right.
fight,
Right.
100%. I agree.
So a lot of this throwing like a girl, it's not anatomical, it's not anything like that. It's just
It's
how
instinctual
girls,
almost.
right. It's
Yep.
just how girls are wired and built differently than your average girl is built and wired differently than your average boy. So, with a girl you just have to work harder to get her sideways to the target. But then they can just throw like completely, high level throws.
So a lot of parents have said, why? What's, again, Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, these guys threw hard. And I was like, well, two reasons. Number one was many pitchers of yesterday brought their arms over their head, which meant that they didn't hold the ball in the glove with the ball facing it, which then internally rotated your arm. It was more of a handshake, or even if the ball is facing them. So when it comes out of your glove, you're in a much better position.
Right.
And then number two, everyone's first move was down and then home like a slide. Now
Right.
they have told you to, I've literally seen people teach jumping off the mound, landing, and then using essentially what that does, your whole center of mass is for your late. Like if you did it today in Augusta, you'd be shanking balls into the crowd, right? Because that's a shank. And your arm is just behind you, and you're using the elasticity of your arm to sling it as opposed to the power of your core to drive it. And I think those are the two biggest things. And they're teaches, right? You look at
Right.
Clemens, even I got a picture of David Cohn doing this, unbelievable one-legged squat.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, and now they're literally teaching drift. Oh, you need
Right.
to drift. No, you don't. I mean,
Well, you need to
so
technically you need to collapse your backside. The
that's
the
not
good
happening.
right, the good stuff is actually being labeled a flaw.
Correct. Right. Why?
Drop and drive, collapse your backside, that's all the good stuff because that
Correct.
engages the
And
core,
the
that engage
safe stuff,
right, right,
that will
right.
allow you to pitch and make 35 starts in a
Well,
year.
and let me make a point. I had someone ask me this the other day. He's like, "Okay, if I went with your ideas, how much velocity am I going to give up?" And I'm like, "Well, Aroldis Chapman is completely consistent with my ideas,
Great.
and
I don't
he's
like his arm. He's got a long, but he's on time
right,
because he sits so unbelievably well and truly throws downhill.
right, right. He's throwing with his whole body. He's
Yep.
incredibly athletic. His arm is mostly just
He's
along
still
for
at,
the
he was at
ride.
101 the other day in
Right,
Boston.
right. I thought he put up 103 against the Cardinals.
He may have. He may have. Someone just said
But
he's still over 100. Yep.
right. So it's that level of athleticism, the kind of thing that you saw in Tom Seaver, that you're still seeing in Aroldis Chapman. You used to see it in Justin Verlander. Verlander has been coached out of it. And
Hmm.
I know Brent Strom, who was the pitching coach with the Astros, at the whole time that Verlander was making the changes to try to stay healthy and that actually led to his Tommy John surgery. I was sending emails to Strom saying, Brent, this is a terrible idea. I was sending him all these pictures. I'm sending all these historical precedents. But Ron Wolforth and the Driveline guys got in Verlander's ear and screwed up a generational arm. And
Wolford
it's
is the Texas Ranch guy, right?
right. He's the Texas baseball
I've
ranch
got
guy.
a now that you said his name, Ben Bills, who's on my YouTube, went there, left with a present, didn't pitch his entire high school, and actually three people told me needed Tommy John, so I taught him literally how to pitch without a UCL, and only one school kept his scholarship, so he was able to pitch in college without. But yeah, he left there after the 3 days with a torn UCL.
Yeah, I mean, Wolfirth is really, he used to be a decent conditioning guy, but he's moved into the mechanic stuff and he's just teaching the same. He's teaching the Nyman stuff. He's teaching, the driveline stuff. It's all one big cabal of people
So
just kind of screwing up arms.
so you're a parent, I'm a parent. How come parents aren't like, dude, hey, my kid just left your camp or my kid's doing your thing, and are they not seeing that the training is causing, like, I don't, this is the disconnect I don't understand.
Well, all right, here's one problem that I've seen in hitting. So I had huge success hitting with Harris Stowe State University, and I've worked with major leaguers, Tommy Pham, Mark Trumbo, Andres Torres, who won a ring with the Giants
Bam
in
just hit a
2010.
game-winning single
Right,
against my
right.
Yankees. Don't, thanks a lot,
Although
Chris.
he would have put that ball out
Well,
if he had
it
stuck
was
with
probably
my
three degrees then, but yeah, okay.
right,
Yeah,
right.
that just missed going out.
Uh, but the problem is that too many people have a short term mindset, and that's the biggest thing. And then to the point I was going to make with hitting coaches, I see particularly in hitting, too many people are focused on not getting fired rather than teaching the best stuff. And the way to guarantee or to not get sued, the way to virtually guarantee you're not going to get fired and not get sued is to teach what everybody teaches, because then you've got plausible deniability.
Because everybody's doing it.
Right. Why do I
Even
why do
though
I
it's the
teach
wrong,
it?
even though
Because
literally it's the wrong thing.
right. And why do I
Provable.
teach it? Because everybody teaches it, you know? What am I going to teach them? Some crazy Nolan Ryan stuff now? So now things have completely turned, and we who are teaching the classic stuff are on the outside, and the safe bet is to actually teach the crap. Because it's safe from the perspective of not losing your job if you're Matt Blake, safe from the perspective of not getting sued if you're a PT in your kind of capacity. Uh,
Well,
or
it's funny that you
right,
said that because someone put up about, I don't know, I think you might have been involved. They put up about injury waiver. I'm like, I, I don't I don't have an like you're doing there's no injury waiver at Velocity RX. I wouldn't even have, like, that's just my job is I'm a physical therapist, is to not harm. Like,
right,
if I gave someone an injury waiver, they'd be laughed at. So these kids
right.
are literally signing injury waivers. Hello?
And it's a cultural thing. There's a lack of patience, and really, fundamentally, people have asked me, the only reason nobody's going to be a Justin Verlander primarily is a lack of patience, because Justin Verlander didn't become JV until the second year of pro ball,
Mm-hmm.
and
I saw him talking about velocity in some little clip.
right. I mean, he threw hard in high school, but he didn't really know, he didn't put it all together until his second year of pro ball. He was very good in college, but in college, you know, he was playing at Old Dominion. It's not like he's playing the SEC, that kind of stuff. You can just kind of kill people. Uh, the problem is that too many people don't have the patience, aren't willing to work hard enough, and it's kind of funny. I've turned into that crotchety old man from the 70s where,
Get
there are
out of
no
my yard!
shortcuts.
Right, right.
There are no shortcuts. If
They're
someone
not.
tells you there's a shortcut, they are
They're
lying.
lying. They're lying too.
And what we are seeing in baseball is a product of a culture of shortcuts, a fixation on tricks and shortcuts. And that's why pitchers can't stay healthy, because people don't have the patience. And my heart goes out to, speaking about Roger Clemens and, Matt Harvey. I actually, Matt Harvey's dad in like 2009 came to me for an evaluation looking for the inverted W, and I didn't see the inverted W in Matt Harvey. The problem is that,
He was still shrugging because he needed
well,
thoracic outlets and he had TOS, right? He
right.
took
And
a
then
rib
and then
out,
he
which is
was and he
like,
was
oh my
also
God.
and fundamentally he was taught the Tommy John twist. I've looked at that video that Ed Harvey sent me, and I didn't see Matt Harvey twisting on that, but at some point someone taught Matt Harvey the Tommy John twist, which is the cue to point the ball at
The
center
second
field
base
or second base. Uh, and so the combination of the shrugging and the Tommy John twist, that's
recipe for
what got
disaster.
Matt Harvey.
And I sent countless emails because he was what with the Mets, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, dude, he needs scapular depression work. He doesn't need you to go and take out his first rib. Are you insane? He's never going to pitch again. And guess what? He never really pitched again.
Well, let me go through. I've got a few
Yeah, you got
pictures.
some slides. Let's hear some. Oh, one
Yeah,
one question before we get this.
yeah.
So you said cult. So one of my friends had to. He and I are always talking about. We study cults. We're like, we need to start a cult because there's a lot of money in cults,
There's a
right?
hell of a lot of money in cults.
Is this chase for velocity a cult?
Yes.
It meets all the definitions, right?
Yeah.
Brainwashing, money. It meets every single definition. Can't
Power.
change their mind. Like it's unbelievable. It meets of the top 10 reasons or top 10 characteristics of a cult. The velocity chase is a cult.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've called it the cult of velocity, and
Yeah.
this includes, this includes the medical doctors, the surgeons who are cutting on these people, and and it's really very
Well, they're
kind of
making
simple,
money. James Anders has his own plane. They're making money. They're making
right?
money.
And they're the savior,
Hmm.
for a while, James Andrews was the savior of baseball. You'd hear his name mentioned every week on ESPN.
So
Talk about an ego boost.
is it Fiesig, Felsig?
Fleissig.
Fleissig, he just came out with something about saying that heavy balls are okay. Someone said to me, I'm like, someone got to him. It's like, what do you mean?
Someone,
I'm like, follow the money. Go look at his account, get a forensic accountant, investigate him. Somebody, there's no way that that guy would have said 3 years ago that plyo balls are okay. Someone got to him.
no,
Guaranteed.
obviously someone got to him. It's probably with Andrews winding his stuff down, because Fleissig was working with Andrews, and with
Andrews,
Andrews
right.
winding his stuff down, Fleissig has to find a new revenue source.
Yep. Yep.
Fleissig was Andrews, you know, biomechanics guy, and now that Andrews is out of things, Fleissig has to he's chasing the money just like everybody else.
Then the cult. All right. So you got some slides. This is
Yeah,
great. Thanks for being so
let me
prepared.
show you the Matt Harvey thing brought this to mind. Okay, so you're seeing this.
Yep. I can see. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so so these are pictures that I've collected kind of over the years. Uh
So this is Verlander
right. This is
at
here, let me
front
bring
foot
this up.
strike. And now, so
Oh,
even with this, I think he's got a lot of mass forward at that position still, but his arm is up. But you don't
well,
like
and
this
this
either, do
is
you?
so one of the things that I say about Verlander is copy Tigers era Reeboks wearing Verlander. Look at the shoes.
Yep.
These are Under Armour.
Yep.
So we know that this is later Verlander. This is 15, 16, 17, not 2012 best player in baseball Verlander.
Oh, good
So
point.
there's a reason why I say that, because this is actually this is Justin Verlander post Ron Wolforth and post the core muscle problems and all the stuff that Verlander had. Now some of it was Kate Upton. When you're dating freaking Kate Upton, obviously that's going to be a little distracting and you're going to get out of your
Sure.
routine. Uh,
Yep.
but I think what happened is Verlander got out of his routine and he went to Wolforth to try to help him, and Wolforth, instead of helping him, screwed him up. And so you're seeing some evidence of this, although
So this
this is,
picture is post Wolford because I don't like this photo at all.
yeah, no, this is post Wolforth. It's not the greatest picture that I have. I've got a better picture uh, that I'll show you. I found well, this is one of my favorites of Verlander, and you can actually see he's more back in this kind of a picture,
100%.
right? And then I found
100%.
this one I found just the other day, which is the same thing. And again, it's so look at the shoes,
Yep.
Reeboks.
Reebok.
So this is pre-Wolforth. This is
Pre-Wolford.
pre-Wolforth Verlander.
Much better position. I mean, the gloves, the glove side being up that high is still, firing his upper traps, but this is a much better position.
Right. Uh, and so Verlander was my model, and this is, I'm looking at, this is the Mariano Rivera cue of using your front elbow as a gun sight. There's very little scap loading here. It was this angle of Justin Verlander that convinced me that a lot of Nyman's stuff on scap loading was nonsense because at a minimum it's not necessary to throwing hard because Verlander, there's very little scap load here. There's maybe 10 to 15 degrees, and a lot of that is just kind of incidental.
So when you say scap loading, define that for me.
Scap loading I define as the distance of the throwing arm side elbow and the glove side elbow behind the plane of the shoulders. So
Okay.
see
So
how
I would define it, right? So this is how words get us. So to me, scap loading is downward depression and inward rotation of the shoulder blades in that scapular depressed position. So there's two different definitions
right,
of some because I think, if you're in and tucked, that's going to give you
right.
more of an but that term right there needs to be we need an avatar definition of that term because I thought that's what people meant, but that's not how I would define. We're talking about two different things, but go on. That's a good point.
Well, and I would, and there's a difference between where you're doing your, and my shoulder barks whenever I do this.
Yeah, I can't even look at it. Right? It's yeah, right. It's such a bad position.
There's a difference between this position, which is roughly where Verlander is, and this position, which is where you're getting into Mark Pryor territory, where
Yep,
the elbows, here my elbows are below the level of the shoulders by, 10, 15 degrees or so.
correct.
This is a normal kind of punching position, and you think about throwing a punch, this is where you would throw a punch from. The problem is the modern stuff where you get all trappy and the
Mm.
elbows are getting high. And
That's
this is all
literally it's literally a mechanical impingement because when you do straight horizontal abduction, your shoulder blade doesn't follow the scapular humeral rhythm. It doesn't turn out of the way, and you're literally bone on tendon. You're crushing
right.
that supraspinatus tendon and your labrum.
Well, and I could feel it whenever I do this, my
Yeah,
shoulder
I just tell
creeps.
people, I'm like, just keep your arm there for 10 seconds and tell me if you think that's a good position, then we'll start there.
But so Verlander taught me a lot of stuff in terms of moving. Here's another kind of the same angle. This is 16. This is Under Armour. This is a pretty good position. This is that Mariano Rivera kind of gun
Yeah,
sight
I
position.
like the right shoulder, the right elbow being, almost at the level of his numbers. That means that upper trap is less engaged, which
Right.
is
He's
good.
down he's down here, which is a
Correct.
stronger position, and you can still
Much
punch.
stronger.
Right, you can still punch from down here.
Absolutely, you can.
You know. Uh
That's a good picture.
Yeah, well, and so let me compare. So this is Nolan Ryan. This is Nolan Ryan with the Angels when he's really moving his best. Uh, the foot's almost down, the arm's almost up.
But
This is night.
look how low and deep and powerful he
Right,
is. Look at his
right,
legs,
right.
right? Look at it. I mean, even you can look at his jersey. There's very little crimping, right? So there's almost no upper trap engagement. And he's not at this 140 degrees of external rotation. He may be arguably at 100, and that might be a lot
Right.
with this, these layback people. Oh, you need, 50 degrees of layback. Yeah, okay. Sure you do.
Well, I mean, layback is one of the things I look for to see whether I think a guy is really in trouble or immediately
Right.
in trouble. The more the layback, the greater the risk he's in. Here's just a com
100%.
here's just a comparison of Verlander and Ryan moving in the same basic pattern.
Yep.
There's a glove side elbow difference there, but that's not necessarily
And
consequential.
I think Verlander's a little ahead. He's a little bit out. His Ryan's center of mass is probably as he's in a lunge.
Yeah,
He's centered. Yep.
right. And again, this is post Wolfirth Verlander. So this is not a perfect Verlander.
No.
Uh, this is perfect Verlander where he's much more back. Uh,
Yep.
Now this is getting into, so why did Verlander break with the Mets? Well, this is the smoking gun right here. You can see the Tommy John twist.
That's so
He's
bad right there.
yeah, no. Where he's got his fingers, basically his fingers are between the ball and his head. So he's pointing the ball at second base or center field. So this is,
And he's
why. why didn't Verlander kill with the Mets? This is why. Because he
Center
was
mass is forward, but he's up. He's higher off the ground here, so
right,
he's not even engaging
right,
his
right.
glutes at all. Now, how'd you get this? Is a great picture.
I just picked these up. I'm just picking these up off the internet.
It's a
And
great
and
picture.
here's another kind of thing with Verlander where essentially he's trying to create velocity out of his arm rather than
His
I've
body.
got then it out of his body. And I've got
Yep.
another picture. I don't have it up, but I've got others that I'll show that show that kind of Chapman doing that.
These are great, Chris.
Right, but this is Verlander kind of internally rotating and pronating, and he's trying to. This is a trick and a shortcut where he's trying to create velocity with his arm because he's not moving as efficiently. He's not getting into his core. He's not getting into his legs. He's
The
not
arm
getting
has
into
to
his.
be the, I say, my friend, the arm has to be the caboose. It can
Yep,
never be the engine.
yep. And then this is Verlander this year. This is spring training, and again, you've got the same kind of Tommy John
Same thing.
twist kind of thing. And I'd be surprised if Verlander makes it through the year effective or intact. Uh, Another comparison with Nolan Ryan, late era Nolan Ryan, the front foot is almost down, the pitching arm is almost up.
His arm isn't even in 90 degrees of external rotation. Look at that.
Right,
Because if it was, I think it would be more even. That's fantastic.
right. But he's in this 75 to 90 degree window,
Hmm.
which is why he lasted. So then this is Shelby Miller. Miller is one of the people who helped me see both the Tommy John twist and why the Tommy John twist is problematic, where you can just see, his thumb is down and he's in a really awkward, difficult position. This
And
next
his
pic,
leg, and the other thing too is, House teaches us of dragging your back leg, right? When you
yeah,
turn your, if we go from the next frame and you turn, instinctively your body wants to walk, right? It
right.
wants to turn and bring that leg forward. And when you anchor it or drag it, it's again putting more, it's a counterintuitive force on the arm.
Well, and you're killing the hips, which forces you to get more out of the arm, and the arm's just not up to it.
Yeah, 100%.
And then
Oh,
here's
gee, who's
right.
this?
This is Shelby Miller again. This
Look
is
at
this
that position.
this is the Tommy
Oh
John
my God,
twist, and
Chris.
this is actually Grayson Rodriguez also. This is why I don't have faith in Grayson Rodriguez, because you've got this Tommy John twist leading to minimal external rotation.
Yeah,
So why didn't Shelby Miller turn into what people thought he would be? This is why. This is
look
this
at
is the
that.
smoking gun right here.
So again, you and I are looking at these
Right.
and being like, yeah, that's wrong, that's wrong. And the fix is literally, meaning
Right.
not instantaneously, there's no free lunch, but it's so simple. Again, I'm going to
Well,
go back to my why are they
right.
allowing this to happen?
Well, and one thing I will say, because people are always asking me how do you fix this stuff, and the fact is that a lot of this stuff is really hard to fix. Once it's in, it's really hard to get out.
Oh,
As
it
I
takes, I mean, thou like literally thousands
right,
of reps to do it.
intentional reps, which a lot of
Intentional
kids just
reps.
they don't have
Well,
the
I
ability.
mean, a lot of kids can't squat correctly. I mean, I looked at, I deadlift, 300. Guy comes in, he loses his like the form of his low back. It's a whole epidemic. It's not just the pitching coach. It's the human movement as well. That's just being
Right.
taught. Well, and I
Let me
think,
go through a
yeah, go
few
ahead.
more of these. This is actually one of the frustrating parts to the point of our conversations with journalists. I actually was approached by, I think it was New York Magazine in 2013 they were doing a puff piece on Matt Harvey, and they wanted to know why Matt Harvey was so awesome. So I gave them a few things, but then at the end of it, I'm like, "Oh, by the way,
He's not going to stay
if
healthy.
you look at this picture of Matt Harvey, I'm not convinced he's going to stay healthy because his arm, he's pronating, and as a result, his arm isn't getting up. His arm is like 45 to 60 degrees short of where it should be if he wanted to last. So I actually sent that email to the guy, and he never, and I said, I'm really concerned about Matt Harvey's injury risk,
As
and
you
he
should
never
have
got
been.
back to me.
Nope, it didn't fit the narrative, I guess.
No, no, that was
We don't fit the narrative. The
that was
cult.
one of the more frustrating emails. And the worst part is to get back to Passan, Jeff Passan. I sent that email to Jeff Passan and I said, listen, I was warning people about Harvey. And Passan in his book, The Arm, had the gall to say that I completely missed on Harvey. which was just a complete lie. Passan just lies his ass off. He's a liar. It's
Wow,
terrible.
that's too
A
bad.
few more pictures. So this is a guy named Trevor Clifton who this is the picture that allowed me to see flat arm syndrome, that allowed
Look
me
at
to
that.
see that pitchers had really kind of made the move from 90 degrees of external rotation or up to
This
minimal external rotation. And this is a very common position now. This,
very
if you want
common.
to understand why the epidemic is happening, is because the vast majority of pitchers are throwing from this position, which, with the Washington D.C. guys, uh, the analogy is running a car engine past the red line. Yes, this will allow you to throw harder. It will give you more
Hmm.
stretch in the shoulder capsule, but but
But
there's a reason why cars have red lines.
correct.
Shohei Ohtani, I don't have any faith in his ability to get healthy. You know,
No, I mean just look at his. I mean his stride length just is way too long. There's no way that he can effectively turn his core there. Flat arm,
right. If you're
over
right, and
engaged upper traps,
if
anchored
this
back
if
leg,
right, if the stride length is too long, you're going to lock up your hips, and then you have to, and then you, in order
and
to throw hard, you have to do these kind of tricks and
and
shortcuts.
and that's literally a medical principle called the length tension relationship of a
Oh,
muscle. Like
really?
like like my bicep is really strong here, right? Because it's
Right,
short. It's not strong here.
right, right,
So when you stretch out beyond the ability of a muscle to contract, you're going to hurt yourself.
right. So I don't have any faith. I love Otani as a hitter. I don't have
Yeah,
any faith
stay
in
a
him as
hitter,
a
man.
pitcher.
Just stay a
Yeah,
hitter.
absolutely. Again,
Agreed.
Mark Pryor.
Oh God.
But the problem with Mark Pryor isn't the inverted W. The problem with Mark Pryor is that his inverted W put him in this flat arm position. You see the same basic flat arm position here. And you could see it in Otani too. Otani's
Right.
is the result of the Tommy John twist. Pryor is the result of the inverted W. Strasburg, another inverted W leading to flat arm position kind of pitcher. But this is fundamentally
And
this is the
and leading
smoking
to
gun.
thoracic outlets so bad he
Right,
can't
right,
have use of his right arm.
because he's so trappy.
Yep.
Uh, he's just this is a mess. And but the frustrating part is that Kyle Body of Driveline is teaching this stuff.
Yep. Teaching this to this
Right.
day. And there's
Spencer
another one, Spencer
Strider
Strider.
in the standard flat arm position. This is what happened to Strider. I have very little faith in his ability to last because he's already had his second Tommy John surgery. One interesting thing about Strider is that he was an inverted W guy at Auburn, and somebody did try to fix him, but essentially they took him from an inverted W position to a flat W position and never really fixed his timing. And Strider's an example of this is a guy who had the intention of getting better, I think, and he wasn't able to achieve it just because once the movement pattern is in there,
It's in there.
it's
It
in there.
truly is. Wow, that's a really bad picture.
Kumar Rocker, I don't have a lot of faith in. He's
Yep.
kind of a combination of the inverted W, the Tommy John twist, flat arm syndrome. Jacob DeGrom, Tommy John twist, flat arm syndrome. I don't have a lot of faith in the Rangers. I don't think the Rangers know
Can't
what they're
he
seeing.
can't stay he can't stay healthy either.
But so that's, those
Those
are.
are great, Chris. Thank you. Those are awesome.
No, I appreciate you're forcing me to get my act together and put that little
No,
presentation
I
together.
like that.
So,
So, Chris, how to I can sit here and I could probably talk for days, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to listen after an hour. So, how do people get in touch with you? What are you doing now to help pitchers? Give me a blurb of that so people can
well,
find who you
I'm on
are.
chrisoleary.com. I tweet at the pain guy. I'm still on Twitter despite all my misgivings. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm a conservative and I'm very concerned about what's going on. I can make a very powerful argument for conservatism and Trump ain't it.
Oh,
So,
oh yeah. You're definitely not a pro-Trump guy. I know that. Yeah.
uh, I think a lot of this comes down to if you don't know what you're doing, don't teach kids anything because I managed to throw pretty well, and most of the kids that I know throw pretty well because I just didn't do anything. They naturally long armed, they naturally got the arm up. Uh, if you were going to do anything with a kid, it's to fix the glove side. Teach them to keep the glove side elbow up, to fold the elbow. the glove side elbow like Verlander does. None of this pulling stuff. The pulling stuff is a lot of the driveline stuff. That used to be a flaw called flying open, and now
Mm-hmm.
driveline sells it as
Oh,
positive
he's teaching.
disconnection. Uh, when in
Well,
doubt, don't teach anything.
don't
Just get,
teach.
just get a kid sideways. Really all you have to do to teach a kid to throw is to fix their feet. Make sure they're getting sideways. With girls, you have to pay a little more attention to that because girls want to face head on. Boys are a little more okay with throwing sideways, which I think is why boys naturally throw a little bit better than girls, but there's nothing fundamental going on there. It's how they're wired.
Right,
Uh,
right. I like that.
so, it's very frustrating. What I'm trying to do is to a degree I'm abandoning the high end because those guys are already broken and there's very little that you can do. I'm kind of retrenching and going back to the youth level and trying to focus on teaching throwing correctly. Don't teach the Tommy John twist. Point the ball at third base rather than instead of doing this whole
Mm-hmm.
twisty kind of thing, just do what's natural, which is for a right-handed pitcher pointing the ball at third base. And really, fundamentally, you don't have to teach that. Kids will just naturally do that.
Mm-hmm. It's a
That's the
natural movement.
frustrating part is a lot of these kids, as you have said, are being coached into this bad stuff. And frankly, it's really hard for someone even like you who knows what they're doing to coach them out of it because most kids they just don't know their bodies that well.
Correct. They don't. Well, kids don't, like I said, I'm gonna drive down the road here. There's a bunch of fields. Kids don't play anymore,
Right.
right? So they don't
Right.
go out and learn movements. Like we played all kinds of sports, did all kinds of pickup things, but kids are, with their phone, right? And
Right.
and and have all these video games. They don't learn fundamental movement, and then we try to add athletic movement on top of that, and it's really a recipe for disaster.
No, absolutely.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. We definitely have to do this again, and I appreciate your time. And for all those listening, please like and subscribe this. It helps to get the word out. Help me save 1 million arms. Help Chris save 10 million arms. But something's got to be done because what's happening now ain't working. Get out of the cult. It's a cult. Trust us. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.